What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at how Manchester City beat Everton in a scoreline of 3-0 in the English Premier League today, and with a very controlled performance where they systematically dismantled Everton and their 4-4-2 or 4-5-1. So now, before we start, check out both my books. They're online on Amazon. There's links in the description below, and I'm using Efficiency Match, free download in the App Store, and that's how I made this video. So now we can start with the back four for Manchester City. So the positioning of Cancelo and Walker started a bit narrow in the wide area, and they saw these two fullbacks play in a deeper position just underneath the height of Rodri, who is the single pivot. As we see here, played the single pivot throughout most of the match and connected the three attacking midfielders of Gundogan, Palmer, and Silva between the lines, with then Foden and Sterling holding the width. For Everton, we saw them use a 4-4-2, and then throughout the match, as they went into deeper areas and defended deep, we saw Townsend drop into the midfield to then create a 5-man midfield. But higher up the field, he would play more as a number 10 in behind Richarlison, and Demarai Gray was on the left-hand side, but subbed off very early because of injury. So now the key areas for Manchester City were their movement in the wide areas centered around creating space in the half space. So what I mean by this is then we can look at the fullbacks and their positioning. So the first of which is the versatility from Cancelo. So from here, from the positioning in the wide area being more narrow, it creates natural passing options all diagonal into advanced areas with then secure circulation. And then from here we can then see Stones Laporte shift over to accommodate circulation to maintain connections. And when they went with a more asymmetric approach, then we would see Cancelo go in the wide area and then Foden go higher, creating dual width, which would then overextend the Everton side, pull Townsend forward, who would then come from a central midfield position, and then almost always create the free man between the lines with plenty of access points to get him on the ball facing forward and a lot of links. So if we look at it, we can see the rondo situation that's occurred and the structure that's centered around Gundogan. And one of the biggest things was the central defenders of Everton. They didn't jump into areas like this, and they didn't break their connection. They pretty much always stick to their line, which then left them two defenders down in the grand scheme of things, because having their defenders stick to their back line, their two central defenders weren't aiding and helping cut off access to these dangerous players between the line. Instead, they held their defensive shape and let players roam free in between the lines and in these dangerous attacking positions. So now when we look at Manchester City, not only could Cancelo provide dual width, but he could also come narrow, more inside towards the half space to narrow the defensive shape from Everton, and then allow Foden to then become free and allow a direct pass to go into Foden. And then with the occupation of the half space between the line of Ilkay Gundogan, we then see Townsend using his cover shadow and more spatial control principles to cut off access. But when the ball goes wide in this area, then they have a 2 versus 1 against Coleman. Or if the defender shifts across, tracks the run of Ilkay Gundogan, then we see space left for a player like Palmer to then get on the ball between the lines in the number 10 position. Now we can look at the single width used by Cancelo as more or less one of their last variations, aside from coming deeper, which we saw with Walker. But then when Cancelo would come as the wide player, then more likely Foden would come between the lines and either occupy the same half space, or they would use partnerships to then have pinning occur to then try and create a free player between the lines. But oftentimes this overload would come to then increase their odds and players coming in to this advanced position in the half space, which is always a targeted space for Manchester City. But then by being able to increase the connection into the wide area and then shift across to maintain shorter connections and faster passing options, then by playing into the wide area, we can create diagonal passes into the half space. But we often see this with Kyle Walker because of his qualities and his pace, especially throughout the match. So when Sterling would make inverted runs, and we reset the structure here, Sterling makes inverted runs from a wide area going more narrow, Then we see Kyle Walker going wider and Bernardo Silva going back towards the ball. So this would often allow then Kyle Walker to get on the ball in a higher position, with the creation of this wide structure of 3 players now, with the focal point of getting the ball between the lines, in the half space, or in behind through a direct diagonal pass. And then from here, the positioning of Palmer then aids when he enters the box. So if the ball is played in behind into Sterling running through the half space, the defense drops to then cover the ball. And now Palmer, who's about 5 yards off of the central defenders, as the play moves into the assist zone, we have our central defenders covering the space. Palmer's left free at the top of the box because of his positioning between the lines. With when the defenders drop, he'll still be in this space between midfielders and defenders, easily accessible for a cutback. And then if this doesn't occur, if a defender stays, we have a player like Gundogan who's following play. So Palmer makes a run in, he drags the defenders out, and Gundogan comes to attack the space. So this positioning of the 3 attacking midfielders really aids in their efforts in creating dangerous chances in the box. Now, when Manchester City entered the second half and went 2 goals up, then they really started to narrow their shape, overloading the half space, decreasing the distances between their players. And what this did was it promoted faster ball circulation around the back, and in transition they were much closer. We also saw players like Bernardo Silva or Ilkay Gundogan come deeper much more, or have Cancelo invert completely to then create a faster transition and just to secure up the team. So when this happened, then the half space would be vacated and then provide more options of movement between the lines, but it created a stronger structure and circulation and gave them more control over the match to completely see out the game. Although it took away advanced options, the priority was seeing out the victory and keeping clean sheets. And then when Everton had to go for it, subbed on Rondon, and they were pulled a little bit further forward, then more space was created, and then more chances were also able to be made. Now in the Manchester City defensive phase, although they won the ball back most of the time through transitions and it didn't take very long, they did have a few moments where they had to defend for just a few actions. And in possession, Everton didn't have much going for them. They pretty much went with a 4-4-2 with deep fullbacks, especially early on, and their wide midfielders didn't access dangerous areas, with then Townsend playing between the lines and Richarlison as the lone number 9. But from here, the double pivot primarily stayed in the center to try and give them some control and not let them break their defensive structure even when they had the ball. So from here, it gave pretty much Manchester City full license to go man for man and cut off all the outlets using man orientation, which then Everton just couldn't handle and weren't good enough to build out of or use any type of movement to manipulate Manchester City's defensive phase and expose them in dangerous areas. But that's where we're going to wrap up the analysis, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.